Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to Celebrating the Brand Ambassador. This is episode 44. And I'm really excited to have with me today an old friend of mine, somebody I've worked with for many years and have gotten to know over the time, Tony Bagnulo from Bull Rush Gin and also Broad Creek, am I saying that correctly? This consulting. And also I have Joshua Morton, who I've also gotten to know over the last, I think I've known you for at least 10 years now, from Barrow's and Ginger Liqueur. Welcome, gentlemen, to Celebrating the Brand Ambassador. So as we started doing the show, I have evolved it over time, and now I like to split it into two things. So the first part of the show, the first kind of like 10 minutes, we're going to talk about your guys' background and where you came from and how you got into this business. And then the second half is going to be all about business. So different best practices. So for those of you who are tuning in, you can always, if you want to make a comment or you have a question, you can always put everything into the chat. So Josh, I'm going to start with you because I realized I usually have a pre-interview with everybody, and which we had, and I didn't ask you the question, which is, who is Joshua Morton? Like where did you come from? What's your backstory? And then what inspired you to create Barrow's Intense Ginger Liqueur? I can't talk this morning.
Well, I was trying to figure out how to share this, but it didn't pop up. So I will just ignore that for now.
Sorry about that.
No worries. So on a professional level, or
first, give me a little mix of personal and professional.
So I was born in New York City. I grew up in Massachusetts, and then got back to New York City as soon as I was an adult and could move here. Love the city. I have a wife and a 16-year-old son and a dog.
Nice.
And yeah, it's been fun. And for the first 20 plus years in New York City, I had my own business doing small business tech consulting, and was involved in two tech startups that were very short-lived. One, and in both cases, it was because technology just moved way too fast, and the business cases that we had became obsolete like overnight. One of our startups, which was a great idea when you had unlimited minutes on your phone, was doing podcasting via cell phone data, and you would dial into a phone tree and it would then play via VoIP podcasts. And we got all the tech sorted, and we were about to launch. I think we were in beta, and then the iPhone came out.
Aww.
That was the end of that company. So the liquor industry is a definite refresher in that it doesn't move quite as quickly as the tech industry. And in the beginning, it was very frustrating because it was super antiquated from a tech perspective. And yeah, and it was a hard transition. But so I had a lot of experience with small businesses and startups and all that aspect, but I had absolutely no business experience with the liquor space, the spirits business. I was a waiter at Friendly's. I don't know if anyone knows what that is. It's
I do.
East Coast chain.
Friendly's.
Yeah. And I had a brief stint at McDonald's. So that was my food experience, if you will, fine dining, as we call it. And so while I was doing my consulting business, I had a lot of dinner parties and entertained a lot. And someone had taught me how to make limoncello, which I loved. But limoncello here versus what you got in Italy that was fresh was two different things. And so I really liked making it, and then they were like, you don't have to just make lemon, you can try other flavors. So then I started experimenting with different things and did blood orange, grapefruit, horseradish, that was a failure, rosemary, etc. And then ginger got into the mix. And so I would make my limoncello batch, and I would make an experimental batch. And then have it at dinner parties. And so when I made the ginger batch, people really liked that. And so it started out as a lemon ginger, and then because I'm lazy, it went to 100% ginger, and people like that even more. And eventually, that's what I basically made. And I did that for almost close to 10 years. I just made the product basically similar to how I make it now for my friends, and had a few of them really like it and encouraged me to turn it into a business, mainly because we had a kid and we stopped having parties as much. And so they were complaining that they couldn't get their ginger fix. And so they went out and bought Ginger Liqueur on the market, and we're like, no, it's not like yours. So we need this in our world. And I was kind of done with the consulting business, wanted a change, and my wife's encouraged me to do it along with a bunch of friends. And I use an analogy of swimming out to halfway out to the lake and realizing, well, at this point, you might as well keep swimming. So basically, every time I took a step forward, I got positive feedback. And by the time I got to the point where it took over, and it was like, there's no going back now. And that was we sold our first bottle in 2013. So it was 9 years ago.
Wow. Now you're stuck now. Hopefully you like being stuck here. It's a fun industry to be stuck in. It's got to be more fun than the tech industry.
It's different. I actually really enjoyed some of the tech stuff, but yeah, this is most of the time fun. The last 2 years have been rough.
Yeah,
rough. We're very on-premise dependent, and so COVID was really brutal for us. And we're finally feeling like we're gonna be able to get it on the other side now. So.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, it is rough. I know a couple of brands who they were on-premise heavy, and so it kind of really hit them hard. And then there are others who thrive because they did so much business on the off-premise. So it was like a hit or miss for so many people. Now, Tony, I know you. You have many different hats. So I know you as a lot of people know you as the owner of the Bull Rush Gin, and then the owner and founder. I know he's the manager of brand ambassadors for DIAGEO and Jägermeister. You used to be my manager back in the day, and then others know you as a dad. So I think we're all parents here, so we have that in common. So tell me a little bit, tell everybody else a little bit about your backstory in the industry, and then what led you to create your own company and launch Bull Rush Gin.
Yeah, sure. So can you hear? Are you guys getting a delay on me, or can you hear me? No problem.
You're speaking now, so go for it.
Okay, cool. So, so I actually grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I went to the University of Georgia, have a degree in landscape architecture. During the time I was in school, I worked in Georgia.
Yeah, I was gonna say, shut off your volume and your Facebook on your or is that Josh? That was Josh. Never mind. Go ahead, Tony.
Cool. Yeah. So my first job was actually in landscape architecture. Got a degree in landscape architecture. During that time, I was working in bars, restaurants in and around Atlanta and Athens, Georgia. Landscape architecture wasn't necessarily the career that it was all kind of cracked up to be. And about 2 years after graduation, my brother-in-law, who's now my brother-in-law, he was starting a beer import company, importing Tiger beer, which is one of the biggest beers in Asia, biggest beer in Singapore. And I jokingly said to him when he was explaining to me, when do I start? And then he called me like 3 or 4 days later and said, hey, a lot of people in Atlanta and a lot of people at bars, restaurants and all that. Do you want to be a beer salesman? I was like, sounds a lot better than being a landscape architect. So we launched Tiger Beer in Atlanta. Within 6 months, I found myself living in New York. Expanded pretty quickly, and I was up in New York.
I didn't know that. I didn't know you sold beer.
Tiger Beer. Yeah. I mean, I think that I think that's kind of why I get the key account manager and brand ambassador universe. I get the sales thing, but yeah, it was a trial by fire to say the least. Of living on 4th between A and B like 20 years. Literally living off of ramen noodles and schlepping Tiger beer on subways and whatnot, but that's a whole other story.
Sounds
I
fantastic.
did that for about 2 years. It was awesome in a lot of ways, but I was like literally on noodles and like bartering Tiger beer into like parties and clubs, and that's kind of heyday of that kind of early 2000s club universe. And so so that was a fun experience. It was actually a great experience, but that wrapped actually after about 2 years. Found myself back in Atlanta. That's when I started working for US Concepts, which is the company obviously that you and I worked for a while. And within about I think about 9 months of taking a job in Atlanta working for that company, they said, hey, you want to be the event manager in New York? And I was like, hey, I live in New York. So found myself back in New York. That was basically working on the DIAGEO portfolio. So started on the field side, just doing events and promotions, and then switched over to the experiential side and working with Johnny Walker and a couple other brands on their big experiential program. During that time, I kind of basically found myself running the Masters of Whiskey program. And then they said, well, we want to kind of put a dedicated focus on just brand ambassador management. I mean, Elaine, at the time, we had, 55 brand ambassadors just with DIAGEO.
Absolutely.
So they basically said, all right, Tony, you want on all the brand ambassadors. So that was, 18 Masters of Whiskey, a handful of reserve brand ambassadors, 8 Kettle One ambassadors, a couple of tequila ambassadors, a couple of awesome mixologists that used to get trouble on occasion. Wink, wink.
No, don't know what you're talking about. Never. There are still rules in place at DIAGEO because of me.
Yeah. So kind of ran all the DIAGEO Masters of Whiskey and brand ambassadors and all those folks for a while. Then moved to a company called Team Enterprises in Foil. Did similar work, kind of experiential brand ambassador management, et cetera, for Bacardi. And then I was vice president of on-premise marketing for Sidney importing for a while, just working on Jägermeister, basically building like a handful of key account managers, about 20 key account managers, really just kind of focused on doing Jaeger stuff in 4 accounts in certain markets. Then I found myself in Hilton Head and I started doing consulting. And my first client was a distillery up in Greenville. And I was, I really wasn't like looking to launch a big gin brand. I mean, I love gin. I kind of wanted to have my own brand. I wanted to do those types of things. I was doing consulting. I was hanging out in the distillery one day and I said, hey, do you guys want to get into the gin business? And I love gin. I worked on Sapphire, I worked on Tanqueray, I worked on Monkey 47. I have a passion for gin. I love gin. They said, nah, we're not really into gin. We don't want to do gin here. We're just going to do whiskey. And I said, can you guys help me launch a gin brand? And they said, quote, heck yeah. I guess that was the censored version of what they said.
You can curse on my show.
We don't really know how gin is made. Yeah. So they basically said literally, fuck yeah, no problem. But then, of course, they followed it up with, we don't really know how gin is made, so you're going to have to figure it out on your own. We know how to run stills. We know how to make whiskey. We understand, obviously, the distillation process, but we don't understand, botanical ratios or sourcing botanicals or how much botanical you need to X number of bottles that you're trying to make and how much, what the ratio of juniper to lavender to coriander to angelica to whatever is. So you got to figure that out on your own. So did
Which
that.
we're going to talk about in a bit because you guys have a similar story. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Did there still even have a gin basket?
Nope. We actually ended up going to so the process talked about it a little bit, but long story short, they didn't have a gin basket, so we called a bunch of distiller friends and they said just go up to Walmart and buy a really nice pillowcase and suspend it. And then you'll get
Great question, Josh.
Yeah.
So that's how you started the Bull Rush.
Yeah, we still kind of do it like that, even though we're not at the same distillery.
But that is funny. Well,
I started in South Carolina. Started with friends here, and then we went to Georgia, and then Ohio, then New York, New Jersey, now Florida, Connecticut. Actually, we're just emailing somebody in California that wants it. So it's all been 100% organic. I launched with like $3,000, and it's basically fed itself. And here we are. Yeah, and then that kind of parlayed into Broad Creek Spirits Company, which is a little bit bigger company, not just Bull Rush, but we do some importing. We do own Bull Rush. We're probably launching a couple of other brands this year. We import this brand, Chileño Mezcal, if anybody's seen the mezcal, anybody can see that. And then we rep some brands in a couple of markets. So we kind of do a little bit of everything. That's kind of what we do, and I guess that's how I got here.
I think that it's a good path. It was all kind of in line, besides the architecture, the working landscaping, but maybe that helped you with some of your your green thumb for your botanicals now. And that's what we're going to talk about now, because I want to talk about the business side of things, and the fact that as Josh, you alluded to the fact that you really, something you started creating in your kitchen, and Tony, you also started talking about the fact that you had to kind of source your own botanical things you've never done before. So and neither one of them, as far as I know, are chemical engineers or mixologists, or have a background of creating something of this magnitude. So what led you to? So Josh, give us a little. You kind of alluded to before about how you started creating your ginger liqueur, but obviously going from there, from what's in your kitchen to what it is your final product, was a little bit of a bigger leap.
Yeah, I mean, so the interesting thing is that one of the big things that you hear when people take a product that they made that's homemade and they commercialize it is the quality goes down. Like, it's not as good as what they made in their house. And the weird thing is, it's actually better now.
Really?
Yeah, so, and that's two reasons. Number one, when I was making for myself, the only alcohol I could get was Everclear as a base. And Everclear is not great as a base. And so one of the first things that we were able to do is get ourselves on commercial grade neutral spirits. And so we did some research in terms of, well, I did some research, I did some research in terms of what was the best neutral. And so we got potato, we got organic grain, we got regular grain, we got corn, and we got neutral cane. And in the process, the cane was just much, much cleaner and worked better with the ginger. So that was something that you just can't get unless you're got a distillery license. And then in our process, we were just getting ginger from the local market. And what happened was it wasn't consistent. And so we had different types of ginger, and then we had an issue. So we have an issue with consistency. And what that led us to discover was, there were different types of ginger, which I didn't know when I was making it for my friends. And
I didn't know either. I'm like,
yeah,
good to know. I don't cook, so I know nothing about.
So we actually use two different types of ginger. We use a Hawaiian ginger from China, which is sort of like your standard store-bought ginger. And it's really funny. The boxes that we get are these 30-pound boxes, and there's a giant Hawaiian ginger, and then really small at the bottom, product of China. So we're very transparent about everything. But it's basically Hawaiian ginger is considered like the best ginger by ginger experts or Asian people in Asia, because that's people who know about ginger mainly. And so most of the Hawaiian ginger gets exported to China or Asia, and very little makes it to mainland US. You can get it every once in a while. It's really hard to find. So what they did is they took that varietal and started growing it in China, and then sold it back to us. And that's the majority of the ginger you'll find in stores. And so that's what we were using most of the time. And then we got a batch of Peruvian ginger, organic Peruvian ginger, and it was amazing, but it was way too spicy. And so we ended up with 1,000 gallons of this super spicy batch that we couldn't use. We do 200 pounds of ginger in a batch. It's about a quarter pound per bottle. And do we need that comment still up there? Sorry, it's just distracting.
Oh, no, is it distracting you? There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Anyway, hi, Carrie. So we then blended the two together, and that's what our current mix is. So we use the Hawaiian ginger and the organic Peruvian, and the blend of the two allows us to have consistency and create a much higher quality product than we did when I was doing it in my living room.
How long did that take, the process from when you first started playing around?
So to get the original recipe which we launched with, took a good probably 6 months to a year, going back and forth. We were playing around with the level of alcohol, the level of sugar, and the level of ginger to get the balance between all of them just right. And then it took me another year about to get the blended version with the 2 different types of ginger working correctly.
Nice. So you did end up using the Peruvian ginger after all. You just blended it together with the wine. Gotcha.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. Donald actually has a question. Any recent supply chain issues for your ingredients? I guess it's for both of you.
On our side, we haven't had any supply chain issues that we haven't been able to work around. We did have some delays with some things, but luckily we were able to manage around it. And then since then, we've extended our lead times on things. So we had to add a couple of weeks to some of the things, a couple months to other things. With some of our suppliers, they're really great in that we can put in an order for the order, if you will. So we say, okay, we're going to need something in 3 months. So whereas before we would order it 2 weeks before, now we're telling them 2 months before that we're going to need it in 2 months. And then they make sure that they have some on hold for us by the time the order comes in, and we don't end up being out of stock. We did actually have to do a crazy thing because our cardboard, you know, it's the strangest thing. Like bottles were in short supply, but we managed to work around that one. The ginger we never had a problem with. We did have a problem with alcohol. Did I ever think about growing my own ginger? No. I mean, yes, I've thought about it, but the answer is no.
I was going to say some conflict. That's not great. You had problems with
our cases. Yeah, cardboard. Which, like, who knew, right? But so normally it would take about a month to get, when we place an order for more cardboard, it would take for our cases, it would take about a month to get it in, and that extended out to 8 weeks. And so we ran out of cases to put our boxes in. And so we actually had to buy generic boxes temporarily just so that we could store them after we bottled. And then a week later, our actual cases finally came in. So
wow, that's definitely one I have not heard before. I've heard a lot about cans and glass, but I have not heard about the boxes themselves. Tony, did you have? I mean, you're sourcing different botanicals. I'm assuming you might have ran into some supply chain issues.
Yeah, for us, we're mostly through it now, but it was more packaging than anything. You go back particularly 9 months ago, cardboard, to Josh's point, was still impossible to find. You know, it's not something you think about, right? There's always going to be cardboard, but there was no cardboard. So a lot of beg, borrow, steal on that. Not steal, but kind of. We had a glass issue a while. We got through that. Once again, just kind of hustling and scraping and scrounging and finding it. The things we're dealing with right now are like licorice root. You know, it got really expensive. Cinnamon has gotten really, really expensive. Juniper, I think the price of went up by like 15% in the last 12 to 18 months, which when you're making that stuff gets expensive. Yeah. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. I was actually looking to order some botanicals through one supplier, and I'm seeing right now that it's actually out of stock. So a little pucker factor happening here, but we'll figure it out. But yeah, I mean, it's for us, it's kind of been everything. We've gotten through the cardboard and glass enclosure issues, but now we're just kind of dealing with botanical issues. And the reality is, like, you can't change your botanical label or your botanical formula. The TTB gets a little funky about that, but also you can't change the taste of it. You can get
cut out there.
Blending.
No, I was gonna say. So, how do you guys have to pass that? I mean, for something like botanicals, if the prices go up, you know, I'm sure that cuts into your margin. So, I don't know if you've had to raise your prices at all, or are you keeping the same prices?
I think Tony might have froze. So in our case, we've had some minor increases. Definitely, our bottles, we have an extra $200 a pallet surcharge currently because of crazy shipping costs. And our the cardboard went up in price, and the ginger's interesting because ginger's been has fluctuated over the 9 years that we've been buying it, and so depending on the time of year and the year, it's moved up and down. So I had a cushion in my price structure for the ginger around that, and so even though we're not seeing the lows that we were seeing before, but it hasn't gone above the highs that we've had either. So it's sort of, the ginger's still within in range. So basically, you know, we have a slightly lower margin on our COGS are slightly higher, but it's not significant enough to warrant a price increase. We actually did do a price increase like the year before COVID. We kind of are able to take care of it because
you were able to hedge your bets. Tony, I was asking before we lost you was, you know, obviously, you know, the fact that you're juniper, and somebody just actually asked if where you got your juniper berries from. So I don't know if you want to divulge that resource, but that was a question being asked. And then if you've had to change your price structure because now that your margins are less because of the increase in pricing. Did Tony freeze again? He had to call in from his phone, so because his camera wasn't working. Maybe Tony, just call in, and we don't have to visually see you. You know, I like seeing you. All right. Well, we're waiting for Tony to get back. I'm going to move on to the next question, which basically, and then we'll let Tony answer when he gets back in. I'm going to remove him for a second, and then he can come back in.
Show the next. You got to show the
Exactly.
next comment. It's hysterical.
Okay. Hold on. First time I've ever seen Tony at a loss for words. Very nice, Donald. Let's see. Back to stream. Tony, are you back? Nope. Okay. I'll remove him there. All right. So we're going to talk about this because basically the next biggest thing is obviously making something that's scalable. And Josh, you kind of touched on it a little bit. But I'm assuming there was some growing pains when you had to take your product from, you know, what was like your first batch? Like how many bottles did you make when you actually went commercial to then, you know, expanding now? And what are you doing now? And what were some of the challenges?
So one of our first batches we used about 30 pounds of ginger, and I don't remember how many cases that was at the time. And we were doing things in carboys and pickle jars. These 5-gallon pickle jars, 2-gallon pickle jars for our maceration. So right now we use these Boosies behind me, which are 25 liter, and we scaled up to a 1,000-liter tank for our blending. And we moved from a single bottle bottler to a 6-bottle bottler, and our biggest issue actually was figuring out processing the ginger, because I was using a Cuisinart. Literally, I went to Bed Bath & Beyond and bought a Cuisinart, and that's what we were using in the beginning. And that wasn't going to hold up to 200 pounds of ginger.
No,
a batch. I don't know if you can hear like a buzz in the background.
No.
Oh, good. Okay. I can. Anyway, so our buffalo chopper is what we found, and there's a story behind that. Which was how we figured out how to process the ginger. It's too complicated a story to go through. I'll tell you.
Too long. Don't go there. It was a problem. You figured it out. That was the biggest way of scaling.
But the thing is, I found out it from not someone in the industry. It was actually someone outside the industry. So the idea behind it is, if you have a problem, obviously talk to people in the industry, but I was doing something that no one else in the industry was really doing. So I was just telling everyone my problem and being like, what do you think? How can I do this? And the randomest person ended up coming up with a solution for us. So
So your best practice solution is sometimes go outside to get solutions to your problem, because sometimes people don't know. They're experts on everything, right? And I'm assuming, did you have to go to like a food person?
Nope.
No. Fair enough. I like Tony. We were talking about problems with scaling. So obviously, going from your first batch, obviously, and when you didn't get a chance to tell your story about, you never created a gin before. You're not a distiller. You had to, test different botanicals. Tell us, how you came up with the formula, like, of making your gin, and then how you scaled it.
Yeah, I mean, so to your point, I mentioned earlier, I had worked on Sapphire, I worked on Monkey 47. I'd seen all the brand decks and even production decks, and met ambassadors and met distillers and all those types of things. But when you're coming from the marketing side of things, you don't really get granular detail. You will to an extent, particularly if you're at like super high level, ambassador level, sure. But I was a marketing guy and a key account manager and ambassador manager guy. So basically, I had the conversation with the distillery. They said, yeah, we'll do it for you, but you're kind of on your own. God damn it, am I frozen? Can you guys hear me?
Yes. You're cutting in and out, but you're frozen. Maybe try taking the video off. We can hear that. So I was gonna say, take the camera off, go for it, and just go for the audio.
Did you guys hear my on? And
yeah.
Or try coming in through your laptop.
There you go. Tony? All right, we're gonna let Tony figure that out, and eventually he's gonna get a chance to tell his story about how he put his gin together and how he found the botanicals. I'm gonna remove him one more time so he can figure it out. So let's talk about getting a distributor. Getting a distributor is one of the hardest parts of being a brand owner. Like, that's the one thing every small brand, it struggles to find. Is getting that distributor itself. All right, Tony, let's see before we go there. Tony, are you back? Nope. So we'll go to the distributor question. So Josh, for you, what type of distributor, like what was the process of you finding an actual distributor and getting in there? And then, I'm sure you've discovered that some distributors are better than others. So what do you recommend for people looking to get a distributor? And then two, how do you know when a distributor is the right fit?
So I had a really unusual situation, and so hopefully Tony's audio will be back because he'll probably be better.
Tony, are you back?
I'm back. You probably won't be able to see my beautiful face, but you'll hear me.
We can hear you perfectly, though.
Now we can hear you.
Much better. Sorry about that, guys.
Better. Okay, that's not sure. So Josh is we're just getting into the distributor part, and then I'm gonna get back. So Josh is talking about the.
We'll go back. Let's go back first.
All right, fair enough. So Tony, we were, when I was talking to you before, so tell me your story. You were, as you said, you were a marketing person and now learning how to make a gin. So what did it take to finally put your gin together? Figuring out the recipe and then getting it from, that one test bottle into getting it scaled and now selling in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, so, I was saying earlier, so obviously I understand the marketing landscape, understand the general principles of how gin is made and the botanicals that are used, kind of had a sense of that and the different processes. But, when it comes to actually standing in front of a still and sourcing botanicals and finding NGS suppliers and understanding all the different ratios of, juniper to angelica to spirit to, ultimately translating to X number of bottles. I didn't know anything about that, not at that level of detail. So, I mean, as far as the flavor profile, it was literally just like, ordering botanicals online through different spice suppliers or going to Whole Foods or the local farmer's market and literally like macerating botanicals in 100 proof Smirnoff or 100 proof New Amsterdam. It sounds like Josh used Everclear. It's all basically neutral spirit. So that's kind of how I got, real good understanding of flavors and how they interact with each other. But the question was that scale, right? Really understanding, okay, how many pounds of juniper berries do I need to make, 200 proof gallon rum? And then what's the ratio of juniper berries to juniper berries to angelica to coriander, and then what other local stuff I want to add to make it my own. And I was actually going through kind of just a bunch of old distiller manuscripts, and I found an old basically recipe for gin from like the 1830s.
Oh, wow.
And it actually said, okay, for X number of proof gallons, you need X amount of juniper berries. And for X amount of juniper berries, you need, half amount of coriander, angelica. So that actually kind of became a jumping off point for scaling.
And you found the recipe in a book that from 1830.
Literally a recipe in a book from the 1830s. And trust me, I wasn't like, full disclosure, I wasn't like in an old antique bookshop. Okay, I was online and I found it. But so that kind of became the jumping off point. I mean, you would ask kind of one of the biggest mistakes that I made, though. Obviously scaling up, it's tough, right? Because you're macerating different botanicals, and then you make like 3 gallons, and then you're like, oh, let me scale it up, and maybe you'll make like 5 gallons, right? But that's a lot. Like in your kitchen counter, 5 gallons of spirit is a lot, and then you try to teach yourself how to proof it down, which is a challenge, right? So you kind of have to go for broke, at least for us, because you can't run a still below a certain quantity, right? So we're running the still. I think our first batch was like a 200 proof gallon run, which is not huge, but it's also not small, and it's also not cheap. But one of the things that I screwed up when I was making the product, in the recipe that I found, it said, juniper, angelica, licorice, coriander, all the basic stuff. And when I saw licorice, because I'd worked on Jaeger, I thought star anise, and star anise is not the same as licorice root. So the first batch I made, like big 200, 300 proof gallon batch, was with star anise, not licorice root. Just brain fart, like dumb, just didn't do my research. So I basically had 250, 300 proof gallons of a really, really good anisette. Or really, really good
line extension
base for an Amaro. It was awesome. It was great, but it wasn't gin. It was, So it was one of those things I was like, I'm done. I'm dead in the water. First batch, dead in the water. I'm not gonna be able to fund, doing another batch, because I was a quote consultant, which is code for being unemployed at the time. So I basically said, all right, I'm done. And then literally in the middle of the night, I don't know why, it just popped in my head the difference between star anise and licorice root, and I was like, shit, I use star anise. So,
if you're bootstrapping a brand, don't quit your day job.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean that the first, I didn't take any money out of the business. I didn't take a salary until 5 years in, I think. And maybe 6. And literally I would, do my consulting during the day. I'd have dinner with my family. I would leave my house at like 9, 10 o'clock, get to my production facility and make a batch till 3, 4 in the morning with the guys next door that were making croissants for the bakeries in New York City. And I'd get a hot croissant at 3 in the morning from them. If I saw them early enough that they would put in an extra one for me. Otherwise I just have to smell them and be tortured. And then go home and then do it all again, and then somehow figure out how to squeeze in hand selling it once I had enough to do. But don't either raise a ton of money from somebody else, not your own money, or don't quit your day job. That would be my 2 pieces of advice for starting a brand.
That's good work. Good words of advice. As somebody who works for herself, I totally agree with you on that one.
Yep. The wonderful world of consulting always comes in handy. And that's actually, we can talk about later, but that's kind of how I forayed into Broad Creek Spirits Company, because, I was doing consulting and working with other brands and helping people with other brands. So it's just kind of saying, all right, how can I turn this into a legit liquor company? And that's kind of how we got to Broad Creek Spirits Company. That's
what you're doing. So what was your first, when you actually bottled it and got it out in the marketplace?
November 5 years ago. So
gotcha.
Just over whatever. So was that?
And that was at like a year and a half after you started?
Yeah, it was about it. I would say from the time we said, hey, we're going to launch a gin brand, to the time we had product, going to a distributor, it was probably a year and a half. Granted, and Josh can speak to it, some of that is flavor development, and some of that's screwing up batches, and some of that's, really trying to figure out what you want. But a lot of that's waiting on labels and, finding bottling time and getting a federal wholesale basic permit and, you know, all that kind of stuff that you have to do to launch a gin brand or any spirits brand. You know, so it wasn't like a year and a half of tinkering with flavors and being mad scientists. It was, you know, that's just how long it takes to get a brand through the system, you know, legally.
Yeah, we incorporated about a little less than 2 years, like 20 months, 22 months before we were able to sell our first bottle. And so that time was, you know, label development, branding, recipe development, but also we got our own distillery license. So that was finding a space and, you know, getting the licensing and building out the space and all that other stuff as well. And then finally getting to the point where we could produce. So it does take a while to get going.
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, because we're a, for lack of a better term, contract distilled brand. I prefer the term collaborative distillation, but that's a whole other thing.
I like that.
Yeah. But, you know, we already had a distillery. They already had space. They had stills. They had a DSP. They had, you know, process for getting labels approved and all those types of things. I didn't have to do that. So it kind of expedited our process, but, you know, we still had to, you know, get our permitting, and we had to get distributors lined up. We had to get our formula tweaked. We had to print labels. We had to design labels, all that stuff that just kind of magically happens when you work on other brands.
Exactly. It's already there. Well, that leads me into my next question about talking about the distributor, because that's probably the hardest part for many people. Like once they perfect their product, now they're trying to get it out there in the world, and they are trying to get a distributor to pick it up. And, you know, obviously, you know, and people get excited to get into a distributor, but then they find out it's not the right distributor. So I'd like to talk about, you know, any thoughts, you know, what you learned about how to get into an actual distributor, you know, any advice you have about, you know, how do you find a distributor to actually take you seriously and take your product in? And then once you're there, like, how do you know you're in the right one? Because I know sometimes you're kind of, you know, some people get stuck in the wrong one. So because they're so desperate. So how do you kind of avoid that pitfalls? I don't know, Josh, you want to start? And
yeah, so I had a very unconventional path. So in New York State, if you have a DSP, if you're a producer, you are allowed to self-distribute. So I started out literally hand selling my product, got it out to about 100 accounts, and I was delivering it. I was everything. I mean, I was making it, I was marketing it, I was selling it, and I was delivering it. So it was the whole process. It was all, well, two of the tiers in one. And I did that for a little less than a year, maybe 9 months, and then got discovered, I guess would be the way to describe it. The folks at Sorrellis, John Easton came across my product and thought it fit well in his portfolio, which at the time included Casamigos and Destor and Don Q Rum, and they were looking to add other brands, and so we got brought into their portfolio as an agency brand. And so we went from self-distributing to originally we were just supposed to be regional distribution with them and grow in the East Coast, and then eventually they were going to take us national. And so we went from I went from hand selling to all of a sudden being with Southern in about a dozen states, and then their national account guy sold us into a hotel management chain, which I later.
Oh, he just froze. What happened, Josh?
Did I lose you?
Yeah, for a second. What happened when they sold into a national chain?
You still there?
Yeah. Wayne? What happened when they sold? You stopped where you were about to say about the national hotel chain.
So they so then we were in 40 some odd states over, you know, within 6 months.
Wow. That ought to be a challenge. Were you able to keep up with the production?
Yeah. So they so that made us have to be in about 40 states all at once. So we went from self-distributing to within the space of 6 months being in 40 states and being a national brand, or having national distribution. It doesn't make you a national brand. And that was pretty crazy and way more than we should have done, but we made it through it. And
why was it way more? Because you weren't
so our
ready to
distributors
scale?
were Southern. It was basically Breakthrough, the big boys, right from the start. Which
everybody's having technical
sorry, you're
difficulties.
breaking up.
All sorts of tech difficulties today.
All sorts of technical. Josh, I was saying, I was going to ask you, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was about to say, you mentioned that, it was a little too big, too fast. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's a thing that people should be aware of, like how fast you grow, and did it cause you any problems? Like, did it, was it to your detriment that you grew that fast, or were you able to manage and adjust to it eventually?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, it definitely lost a lot of sleep over it. But since I was bootstrapped and we didn't have like deep pockets to fund the growth, it was very challenging. And I think if we had gone slower and were able to fund the growth better, it might have made it easier, and it might have been more successful in when we went into the markets. So we did have the advantage of having the Sorrel sales force, but a sales force without a lot of money behind it to support the brand is a challenge. So it definitely we were undercapitalized for that big a move, and so we learned a lot of things by doing them on a scale that you want to do small as opposed to big. So fail often, fail quick, but if you can, fail small. And so it's not too expensive on the loss. I mean, we did a whole 50 ml program that just was a total disaster because we didn't have the resources to support it properly, and it ended up being a big bust, and that was a very expensive failure. Mistake.
I can imagine it was, because just getting the 50 ml bottles is a big cost. They're so expensive. So, wow, yeah, that's a good lesson to know. It's like, yeah, don't scale unless you have the support to follow up behind it, because it's going to cost you. It sounds great, right? It probably sounded amazing. It's like, oh, we're going to get all these places. You get all excited. Yep. You're like, this is the dream, and then the dream ends up hitting you in the pocket.
Well, and it was just too much to control. It was too much to deal with all at once. And there was a lot of things that we had to learn. There was a lot of things that Sorrel had to learn about selling the brand. And it was so there was a big learning curve to it. And then the other thing is that then they switched distributor networks on us. After 2 years, Bacardi moved over to Southern Glazers. And so Don Q moved to the R&DC network. And so we had put all this time and effort into establishing the brand as a distributor, and then we had to do it all over again, which was very costly and definitely put us back a good year. So we had a very strange situation, and then Casamigos left to Sidney Frank, and then Death Store ended up going bankrupt. And so it was just down to us and Don Q, and they never brought in a whiskey brand, so it was no longer a portfolio play. And so last January, a year ago January, so now it's been a little over a year, we parted ways. I still love those guys; they're awesome. Don Q's the best rum out there, in my opinion. So especially their aged stuff is really good. And their plan is entirely sustainable, and it's been for like 10 years. They were way ahead of the curve on that one. Roberto, who's the distiller, from the family, he did environmental engineering or design in college, and so he totally tricked out their distillery like 10 years ago. It's amazing.
Anyway, it's okay. Don't get distracted.
Yeah. Sorry. So anyway, the thing is that we so now we're independent and we're self-distributing, but we maintain our distributor network almost entirely with R&DC and Breakthrough and Johnson Brothers. So we're with sort of the larger distributors around the country, and so it's great that we were able to get to this position now, and then we have some national accounts that are active, and so we're able to now maintain that and grow it.
That's fantastic. But would you do, okay, so if you could have avoided some of that, to what you're doing now, I mean, I'm assuming part of it helped you grow and build the network, so some of it was completely worth it. Is there anything you're like, I wish I skipped that part and we just went straight here? If you could have, like, if you had the ideal path. That's a hard question.
I mean, in business, you never have an ideal path. It's always something's, and then COVID happens, right? So
true. Fair enough. So I know it's a tough question. I just thought if you had a
I mean, I always think, like, if Casamigos hadn't jumped ship after year one and gone and they had brought in a whiskey and it was a true portfolio play, what would that have looked like, right? Mm-hmm. And so, when I made the deal with Soralis, it made a lot of sense, but then ultimately, because of changes that were completely beyond my control and a lot of their control, it didn't anymore. So if I had been with a Proximo or been with another company that had a full portfolio, what would that have looked like? And I don't know the answer to that. If I had never had the deal, would I have gone out of business? The answer is I don't know. It's just you can't what if that one. That's true. You basically have to play the best hand you can with the cards you get dealt. And
I think that's a good attitude to have. And Tony, I'm assuming you had your own. I mean, what was your path into the distributor, and then I guess what is your growth plan there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, you kind of have to consider that it truly, and I say it and it sounds marketing, but this started as a side project for me. And it started as like, hey, it'd be cool to have my own gin brand and really kind of learn what it takes to do it. And I'll sell it to some bars and restaurants in Hilton Head and maybe Savannah, and that'll be great and it'll be awesome. So we actually went intentionally to a small distributor, right? And particularly having worked on big brands, I know how Southern and Breakthrough and RNDC and all those distributors work. And I have contacts here and I could have gotten into one of the big guys, but I know that the first thing they're going to say is, great, let's run an incentive. Let's talk about pricing. Let's talk about programming. 100% of it's going to be billed back to you. You're probably not going to get any attention at all. So sure, we'll take it. Why wouldn't we? So we actually started with a small distributor, a distributor that did great work for us here in South Carolina called Aleph. But even with that, I mean, they were primarily a wine house. We knew pretty early on, even in South Carolina, super small market, that we were just going to outpace their growth, right? So I think it was about a year and a half in, we switched from Aleph to Winebow, who we're with now. And Winebow was actually at a pretty decent place in their spirits universe. They were just starting to get into spirits from wine. They really want to invest in boutique brands, local brands. We had some good friends there, so they really kind of took Full Rush under their wing and really pushed it hard. And we're the biggest South Carolina made gin brand, so that's kind of cool, right? So we like that. We're the biggest brand in the smallest category in one of the smallest states. That's us, but we'll take it.
Tony's doing exactly what everyone told me that it was the right way to do it. Is own your local market, really build that out, and then you have a base which you can then go to other states and get into the right distributor at the other states with, because you can say, look, I have a track record. This is what we're doing. Yeah, and look, and
I'll be, in the spirit of candor and transparency, like I came out of the gate and I was like, fuck, this is hard. And when I look at my business plan, particularly kind of the conceited mentality that I had working on big brands, I was like, oh man, we'll be selling 50,000 cases a year within 5 years, right? So I would love to say that it was, to Josh's point earlier, right? I would love to say that it was a conscious, intent to say, we're going to stay small. We're going to own our backyard. We're going to do this. If I look at what my original 18-month business plan, it was to be in 8 states, 9 states, 10 states, right? But I realized pretty early on, I don't have the cash flow to manage the COGS, right? I was reminded pretty quickly that trying to get an account to actually take your brand, even if they're your best friends, is tough. Getting consumers to adopt your brand, getting distributors to push your brand, getting people to walk in, at a liquor store and say, I'm going to take this gin brand instead of the 25 other gin brands that are on the shelf. And at the time, craft gin was on fire. Every distiller had their own craft gin brand, and Death Store was crushing everybody. So it was tough. So we kind of said, all right, let me just own local here. But then organically. We got into Georgia because I'm from Georgia and I know one of the biggest distributors in Georgia. And then Ohio, we got in because, the big beer distributor in Ohio wanted to get into spirits, and their spirits manager was a guy I grew up with. And then New York and New Jersey happened organically. We're dead there now, but that's a whole other thing, mostly because of COVID. We're kind of restarting there. And then Florida happened organically because we're with Winebow, and Winebow in South Carolina loves us. So they're like, yeah, you want to get into Florida? We'll do that. So yeah.
Are you with Winebow in New York?
No, we're with MAST-Jägermeister in New York. But we launched, perfect timing. We launched, I think, November 2019. So don't launch in November. Never a good time to launch, but that's when they were willing to order product. And, of course, I know, you never want to launch an OND, but when a distributor says, yeah, we'll take your product and we're going to issue a PO, you're like, well, November it is. And that's just the nature of it.
Patience is a tough one, because especially when you have cash flow issues, saying no is really important.
Exactly.
And doing it the right way, because it just does its disservice to your brand. It does its disservice to the relationship with the distributor. But if you can get into Winebow in New York, they're a good house here.
So, we're pretty happy with who we have, but we're also pretty lucky because, obviously Winebow has grown a lot. They've invested a lot in spirits. They've got an amazing spirits team. And I'll say this to them, and I know them all top down, right? And Onik and the whole crew, they're awesome. But every time I go to a new state, it's more money. And it's building a relationship with distributors that I've never met before, and management that I've never met before. And it's investing in POS and events and, PR and all those types of things. So, we're happy to be with Winebow because they have a national infrastructure that we hope to tap into. But our goal right now is to own the markets we're in. Let's continue to build what we're in. And then, next year we'll look at it, right? And we'll look at expanding into new markets. But, I know the cost of that. So we're pretty happy just kind of sticking with where we are. We want to be much bigger than, owning your backyard for a number of reasons. But, we're going to grow smart. The big thing that I've always said is I don't want dusty bottles, and I want everybody to know about Bull Rush Gin if they're going to buy it. And that's a retailer, bartender, et cetera, et cetera. It's a tough, slow grind of a way to build a brand, but that's kind of how we do it. And kind of.
No, I think slow is good. And the one thing you both seem to have is a mix between small markets and large. And, one of the advice I hear people give a lot of new brands coming on the marketplace is, don't go to where all the big boys are already playing. Everybody goes to the top 5, go to the smaller markets and build your brand, because, you can win there a little bit faster. Do you agree with that?
Well, I worked for Sidney Frank for a while. Obviously, you'd reference Sidney Frank earlier. Their mentality, even with Grey Goose, which was like big glitzy brand, was people fucking buy vodka everywhere. So why? Yeah, of course we're going to invest in New York and Miami and all those types of places, but people buy vodka, people buy gin in Tampa, people buy gin in Charleston, South Carolina, people buy gin in Atlanta. So why do I want to go to Miami where it's going to be $10,000 to get on a cocktail menu, when I can go to Tampa and say, hey, I've got a really good gin at a really good price that's probably going to fit with your cocktail program. Yeah, we'll support it through sampling or whatever you need, or reprinting your cocktail menus if you want that, or training or staff training or those types of things. But it's not going to be the New York, Miami, LA mentality of, give me $10,000, $15,000 and sure, you can have my cocktail menu. And then next quarter, I'm going to go to the next gin brand and do it. So I think that was kind of my mentality out of the gate, mostly because, a lot of what we did with the bigger brands was selling into on-premise accounts and building it person by person, brand by brand, even with the bigger brands, right? So that's always been kind of my mentality more than anything. But like I said, I'm in Hilton Head. It's not the most advanced, and I tell people around here, it is not the most advanced gin market or cocktail market in the world. We sell a shit ton of gin on Hilton Head. And I'm proud of it, and we've got awesome partners. But I also don't need like the badge of, we're in New York or Miami or that kind of stuff, which I think a lot of people have that ego and that mentality. And I think they probably get that from their distributors. They get that from, just their own personal.
I'm sure. And they're also the sexy markets, and people like to go to the markets they want to hang out in.
Well, it's interesting because for us, I lived in New York, so
yeah,
that's where I was going to start it. You know, if I lived somewhere else, I would have started it there, I
absolutely.
guess. And you know, we started in Brooklyn because the rents in Manhattan for industrial space were impossible, and so and Queens didn't make sense. So we just found a space in Brooklyn, and then when we launched, everyone's like, "Oh, Brooklyn's the cool place to be," and I was like, "What?" It's just Brooklyn, like, because I've been in New York long enough that, like, you know, it was okay, you know.
Yeah. Brooklyn used to be the place we didn't go.
Yeah,
it's like you're in Brooklyn.
But Brooklyn was cool, but it wasn't like. So then we added Handmade in Brooklyn to our label because outside of, you know, your New York bubble,
people think it's very cool.
It was a thing, and that's the reason I think why we got our national deal is because of the fact that because we were in New York, even though we were tiny, we were in 100 accounts. You know, but we were on Facebook and we were on Twitter, and we had a social media presence because of being in New York that was much larger than what our brand was. And so, you know, we looked like a bigger brand than we were, and then we were able to grow that way. So it really helped us being based in New York. But it also made it a lot harder because we were, you know, competing with everyone in New York and trying to get those resources, and it's very expensive to do stuff here and all that. So we had that going with us. But the in terms of the secondary markets, I completely agree. I mean, my focus right now in terms of growing the brand right now is, you know, on those, you know, secondary markets. So we're focusing everywhere. You can't really focus everywhere, but in terms of investment dollars, I just can't afford to do big programs in the big states. So we're doing smaller programs in the smaller states and seeing the ROI on those, and then we're going to take that data and what we learn from those states and then extrapolate it and figure out, okay, it makes sense to then do this program that was successful, but now we're going to invest it in the bigger states. And for us, you know, even though we've been around for 9 years now, this is really the first time that we're dealing directly with our distributor network, because up until now, you know, Soralis was managing all of that and doing all of the heavy lifting on that front. So we were one step removed from the process. And so, you know, we still have a lot of learning to do. And also, you know, with COVID, everything sort of changed, and doing GSMs via Zoom is actually amazing, because before you had to fly everywhere and it was very expensive, and you could only get in so many things. And now I can do 4 GSMs in a morning in 4 different states, and it doesn't cost me, you know, a hotel room and flights and rental cars and. So there's definitely an advantage to the Zoom GSM from a efficiency standpoint.
There definitely is an advantage. I mean, people are doing big brand things. I asked a lot of brand ambassadors. I said, now that the world is opening up again, are you gonna move into in-person events? And they said, well, you know, we are going to do some, but to be honest with you, we're going to keep this because I can hit multiple states, you know, in a week on my computer and do, you know, interactive, you know, we'll send samples and things of that nature, but I'm hoping it continues because it allows a lot of people to do multiple different things very quickly. You know, obviously it doesn't have the same impact. And like, I know going to GSMs, which are, you know, an essential part of building your brand and building with distributor, because it is a lot of kissing, you know, shaking hands and kissing babies, or in the case of the distributor reps, you know, buying donuts and taking out for dinner and stuff like that. I know I asked you this question, and I wanted you, Josh, to just expand on the GSMs via Zoom, because you did something really interesting, because a lot of people are going to have to do this now, right? I'm sure, Tony, you have your own experience with this, you know, having the presentation, and Josh, you painted a picture yesterday, so true, of, you know, the brand about the sales rep sitting behind their desk. You know, at first they're excited, and then, like, you know, 10, 15 presentations in, they probably have tuned out, no longer paying attention. So you did something kind of interesting to kind of see how it works and see what the mood was. Tell us a little about that, because I think it's some good learnings about how to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tricky because of the fact that, you know, for those who don't know what a GSM, it's a general sales meeting, and
Thank you. No, paint the picture.
I didn't know this when I came into the business, and so distributors usually once a month will have a GSM, and they invite their suppliers to present to them, and so 15, 20 suppliers will present on a Friday morning to about 1 p.m. And it's 15 to half-hour presentations back to back to back to back to back. And so the poor sales reps are just, you know, inundated with this stuff and get bleary-eyed. And a lot of times, well, especially in the olden days,
there's drinking.
There's drinking, and which you want, and so I mean that's a really important thing that it's harder to do via Zoom is that liquid to lips. So we used to do cocktails, and we were, you know, if we were launching a program around our ginger margarita, for example, we would have the ginger margarita for the reps to taste, and so they could experience it. And obviously, when you're launching the product in the beginning, you want them to taste it to know what they're experiencing. And so, so determining, you know, does it make sense to be the first one or the one at the end of the day? And there's no good slots and there's no bad slots because they all have their pros and cons to them. So my thing when I was is to sort of do anything you can to change up what's going on. So if you can get them to stand up in the room when it was in person, that works. Something to sort of just jog them for a second. And we actually created an app, and so the presentation that I've been doing lately, the big thing is when you're on Zoom is like, you know, when you're on the Zoom, don't be on your phone, right? And so that's the thing they always tell the reps, you know, you're not allowed to be on your phone, but because the app's on their phone, I'm like, oh, you actually get to be on your phone for this presentation, and so we interact with them. So anything you can do to change it up and interact with the reps is something that's important.
And didn't you go into one earlier? Because you can go in, because once they're on Zoom, you can go into other people's meetings, right?
Sometimes, yeah. And you're not really supposed to. But they had wanted me to come into my slot earlier because they were running ahead of time. And so I got in early and I was able to watch some of another supplier's presentation. And it was a lot of spreadsheets and charts, and it was, I don't know how any of the reps were staying awake for it. And so I actually want to get permission from the other suppliers and one of my distributors to attend a GSM and figure out what are the good presentations and the bad presentations so that we can sort of do best practices and improve the experience for everyone involved and the outcomes.
No, which I think is very smart, because you're right. There is good ones and there's bad ones, and I've had to sit in the room. But as a brand ambassador and as an owner of the brand, they are so essential. You know, one of the things we talk about in the show is for brand ambassadors, if you can, and when they're physically in person, go to that GSM, you know, every month, so you can actually get to know your sales reps, get to know their managers, so that you have FaceTime with them. Tony, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I for what it's worth, the app idea is awesome, by the way. But I actually pre-COVID, swore off GSMs almost entirely.
Why?
Because of the cattle call. Because it's basically, I mean, so with my smaller distributors, great, awesome. It's 10, 12 people in the room, no problem. But, and this isn't anything against my Georgia distributor, but they have 80 people in the room, and they have, you know, they have Tito's and they have all these other massive brands. It's on like a Wednesday. It's late in the afternoon. It's fucking hot in the room. Nobody's paying attention beyond the first 3 rows. I think the people in the first 3 rows probably got there late, which is why they were forced to sit up front. And it just was not an effective use of my time, my travel time, et cetera, et cetera. Where I would find value in a GSM is obviously if a distributor wants you to do it, you're going to do it. Because if a distributor asks you to do something, whether you think it's a good idea or not, most of the time you're going to do it just in good faith and to show that you're supporting, right? But the value that I found is more to your point, Elaine, is in the shaking hands and kissing babies, right? If you can get that before time, after time, you know, particularly if you don't know the distributors yet, you know, if you can obviously tie the trip, you know, into ride lists or seeing accounts or spending time with them or QBRs or those types of things. But the roll into town, do a GSM, here's your, you know, 10, 12 minutes, try to get everybody's attention. That I was basically like no, I'm not going to do that unless the distributors want. To me, the Zoom GSMs are like, hell yeah. I love a Zoom GSM. I can make some noise. I can get people jazzed. I can get my points across. I can do something visual and how we're sharing our screen. And then I can go out and sell, or go to market the next day, or do whatever with the time, money, resources. GSM, like a lot of things in the industry, are kind of the necessary evil. And sometimes you got to do them. And when I do them, I try to make them as exciting and engaging as possible. But there was a while there was like, I'm not asking anybody for another GSM. So, yeah.
No, and I get that. You're right. It can be, especially if you're one of the smaller brands. But yeah, the kissing hands and the networking, and then maybe taking them out for a lunch. Absolutely. And then if you can get to work with and build that in. One of the things I like to do if I have a massive Zoom and there's lots of faces, I pretend somebody asked me a question and I just answer. I'm like, that's a great question,
That's
Josh.
awesome.
And I just call somebody's
That's
name.
awesome.
And then I'm like, so what Josh asked, and I'll just say the question.
Yeah.
It makes people start to pay attention.
Yeah.
But yeah, it shakes them up. They're like, wait, I didn't ask. Did I? All right, I'm in the question. But I just started doing that for fun because they'll just stare there like this. And you're like, I don't know if anybody is paying attention. So that became my new trick. Just start calling them out.
That's funny.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. I might steal that.
Yeah.
It is very effective.
Yeah. The flip side for us though, is because with Bull Rush, we've been in most of our distributors for 5 years now. Right. So when we go into a GSM, or if we're talking about somebody else's brand, or we're launching Chileño Mezcal, we kind of know people, right? And we can call people out and pick on them and make fun, or tell somebody in the back row that you actually know personally, hey, wake up, or whatever, so you can have fun. So once you have that relationship, it's a different dynamic. And once they know you and they know your brands, it's a different dynamic. But that first kickoff GSM that Josh, Friday, you mentioned Friday morning, they get there at 9, they have some coffee and some donuts, and then they leave at 3:00. That sucks. And that's just my candid, cynical nature on this stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, the thing for me with GSMs and distributors in general is trying to put myself in their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say, my experience, because we did shift between houses at one point, so I have a little bit of experience, and then I also shifted a little bit after in Texas. We moved over to Victory, and so all distributors are great, and all distributors are horrible. And some are better at some things than others, etc. And what you have to figure out is how to make the best of the relationship that you have with your distributor in that moment. And then, and to Tony's point, if you grow beyond it, then obviously you got to move to a bigger house. But if you're in a medium to a big house, you're going to be fine. I think starting off in a big house, it's really tricky. They have thousands of SKUs, and you're just another SKU. And the poor rep's got a book a mile long, and why are they going to sell your stuff versus someone else's? And so you're competing with every other gin or liqueur or anything else in their book to get that attention. And so if you expect them to be your sales force, you're going to be sadly disappointed. So you have to figure out how you can make their life easier, and you can and help them sell. And I think that that's important. And so that's sort of our approach, and that's why we built the app and our.
So what's the app? I want to expand on that because we're not gonna get to all our questions today because we're gonna wrap it up. But
I want to touch on distributors again before we.
I think this is an important conversation.
So, Tony, why don't you jump in on distributors and then I'll.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I mean, you kind of talk about going back to the earlier part of the conversation is like choosing your distributor, et cetera, et cetera. That small brand small distributor versus big distributor, et cetera, et cetera. I went in knowing that if I went to nothing wrong with them, but Breakthrough, Southern, et cetera, that it would be, okay, here's your, it's great. Love it. Let's run an incentive. Let's run pricing, et cetera, et cetera. What we found with, we'll call Winebow medium distributor, and granted, this was built up over time, is They allow, you kind of know what you're going to get from them, right? You know what they're good at, you know what they're not good at, you know what you're going to have to supplement to really get the brands built, right? And I would say, regardless of who you go with, distributor-wise, make sure you understand that A, your distributor is not going to build your brand for you, but B, some distributors are good at some things, some distributors are good at other things, some are bad at other things, and they're all different. So going into it, understanding what the pros and cons of your distributor that you're selecting are. But then the thing that we have with our distributors now that we built up over time, and I think one of the benefits of working with what we'll call a quote medium-sized distributor in Winebow and here, and then in Savannah Distributing and Georgia, and even Heidelberg, who are within Ohio, who are big but not in their spirit side, is they actually allow us basically direct access with the reps. I don't have to fill out a form to get a ride with. I don't have to go through 17 different layers of communication to get an appointment with a rep at a certain account, right? They've kind of gotten to a point where they say, Tony, we trust you. We like you. We know that you're not going to screw our reps over or overcommit to an account. So just work with our reps and figure it out. So if you can get to that point with your distributors, and trust me, love all my distributors, and they all know, the good and bad of the relationship. But if you can get to that point where you actually have a distributor that allows you direct access to key members of the organization and build those people as almost like supplemental ambassadors for your brand, that's the big spot in the distributor relationship. And to Josh's point, it's never going to be perfect. There's going to be good stuff. There's going to be bad stuff. And that's just the nature of the industry.
Well, I have a question for both of you. Is there, like, if you just Google like liquor distributors, all the distributors by state, like a lot of people like, how do I know, because new ones seem to be popping up. Those are the small ones, like the ones that pop up all the time. It's like Southern, like, how do you find them? How do you get their names?
You want to talk about
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is if you're a distributor, if you're a distillery or you're starting a brand, find your local distillers guild in your state and join it.
Okay.
Day one. It will make your life so much easier for everything, because there's going to be someone in the organization who's been through what you've been through. And whether that's, I had this issue with the TTB, or, a production issue, or I'm trying to get a flange for a part on my still, or, distributors, they're going to have it. So that would be my first step is do that. And then within there, ask, has anyone worked with a distributor in X state? And build from there. Indie Spirits is a great event. They do it in New York to meet a lot of small distillers and network there and sort of build up your connections. And so there are Google searches that you can do, obviously, and that's one way to find it. But there's nothing better than having someone say, I work with those guys, they're good, or I don't go anywhere near them. That
Why isn't there a directory? Like,
because distributors don't want, try and look at like distributor contact forms on websites. They don't want that like full exposure, because it's going to be people like me and Josh all day pounding, calling them or knocking down their door. I can tell you, I'm going through it, and it's quite humbling. I mentioned we just launched Teleno Mezcal with sole U.S. importers of
What is
Teleno
that
Mezcal.
noise, by the way?
Sorry.
I don't think it's me. It was great. We came out of the gate with Teleno.
The plumber doing construction.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
We came out of the gate with, Teleno Mezcal and basically 4 states. Awesome. It's great. But now I'm looking for distributors in Texas and California and Arizona, those Mezcal hotbeds. And it's like basically cold calling. It's, doing a quick search to try and figure out who are the agave forward distributors that focus on craft spirits in these markets, knowing there's going to be probably only 3 or 4 anyways, which sucks. And that's a whole other issue with the industry. But then just saying, hey, I need to figure out who is the decision maker here. How am I going to reach them, and how am I going to get the intro? I've basically started firing off emails just saying, hey, I'm Tony. I have this awesome, we're a Broad Creek Spirits company. We just started importing this mezcal, and that doesn't really work. So I think the best option is to find somebody, a personal contact who's in the industry, who is already with a distributor you want to be with, and have them make that intro and basically vouch for you to say, hey, this is Tony. He knows what he's doing. He's got good brands. He's got an established brand. He's been in the industry for a while. This brand is great. You should at least take his phone call. And I've always kind of felt like if I can get the phone call, then I'm pretty good. But right now, even if I mean, with 20 years in the industry, it's pretty humbling to go out there and say, hey, I want to be in these markets. Now let me go through the process of convincing somebody I know what the hell I'm doing and that I got good brands.
God, it must be impossible if you don't know anybody in the industry. You're kind of like blind. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, it's own your local market first.
Yeah.
I mean, you can self-distribute. I mean, Park Street is an example, and LibDiv is another example where you can, in some of the bigger states, you can self-distribute through them and build your brand to start and prove yourself. So if you don't know anyone, there's ways to do it. In a lot of states now, they've changed the law. So if you're a distiller, you can self-distribute. If you're a distillery, definitely have a tasting room. It allows you direct access to your consumers. That was a huge benefit to us. We opened our tasting room 3 years ago, and it was definitely a huge benefit to us to be able to do.
I didn't know you had a tasting room, Josh.
Yeah, come out to Industry City in Brooklyn. 7 days a week, we come to our tasting room. It's interesting because our product's a little different because we're a ginger liqueur, and we make just one thing. And so the experience of a tasting room is normally, most distillers are making, a gin, a vodka, bourbon, a rye, a single malt, a whole bunch of things. And so you go and taste, a half a dozen stuff. And in our case, it was just the ginger liqueur. So I was trying to figure out, well, what's the experience going to be like for the consumer? And since our stuff mixes with everything, and in New York State, I'm allowed to sell any other New York State distilled spirit as long as it has 75% New York ag in it. So it's really New York State spirits as opposed to just someone bottling something from MGP. So we have 160 different New York State spirits behind our bar. We have 35 other distillers that we represent. We do tasting room takeovers, or we did before COVID. We're going to bring them back, where we'd have other distillers come in and take over our tasting room for a day and distill stuff with us and et cetera. So we kind of turn it into a New York State tasting room. But
that's cool.
That's very cool.
That is very cool. All right, so guys, unfortunately, we're kind of coming on over. I usually try to do an hour and 15. So we're gonna miss a few questions here, but I always like to wrap it up with advice. So basically, if you could give any career advice for those looking to, I guess I usually say to be a brand ambassador, but actually, I do want to ask that one question before we wrap it up. You guys are both, you work for your own brand, you own your brand, you created your brand, you're out on the street itself, hustling. So you know exactly what it takes to sell your product. You obviously want to hire some support in the field. So if you're looking for a brand ambassador, what are the qualities that you're looking for? Tony, I'll start with you. What do you think embodies a good brand ambassador?
I mean, for me and my brands, I think that the biggest thing is hustle and drive. I mean, those terms sound cliche, but I can teach somebody about gin. I can teach somebody about the on-premise universe. I can teach somebody how to sell. I can't teach somebody, to get up every morning and go out and see 10 accounts and get their butt handed to them and then wake up the next morning and do it again. That's just a certain personality. So I look for somebody that's got that dynamic ability to connect. They're passionate. They want to work in spirits. They love the spirits industry. Maybe they were a bartender, or maybe they ran restaurants, or they were a promo person or whatever. But that intangible ability to drive and hustle and do that stuff is, I value that more now than I did ever working on big brands, because it's so critical. And it's sales, right? That's how you stay in business. And we're all brand people and we're all ambassadors, but ultimately everything is about sales and moving product, and obviously doing it in a way that's going to be right for the brand that you're trying to build. I never tell my people to get out there and push for floor displays or, to do, 50 case drops in certain retailers, unless that's right for the brand. And there are plenty of brands that's right for it. I do that for. But somebody that can get out there and do things with a commercial mindset and a sales mindset, and is willing to work and spend their day in a car and making appointments and seeing 10, 12, 15 accounts a day and following up and connecting with distributors. That's the biggest thing that I look for. And they don't have to have industry experience to have that. It's good if they have a base level of understanding, But that passion, hustle, drive is, I think, critical for somebody, for me and my brands. Now, different brands might be different. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. And they also don't have to have industry experience. It helps, but I've seen some great people who didn't come from this world.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Josh,
I think
for you,
I'm going to echo what Tony said. Is that some of the best ambassadors that I've seen? You got to have the basics down in terms of execution, and so. Yes, having a great personality and being able to engage people and all that sort of stuff is important. But really, knowing, basically having the sort of back of the house skills in terms of, mapping out your day so that you're not going from an account on one side of the city to the other side of the city and then back to the,
So organizational skills are important.
Organization skills. If someone emails you, emailing them back, responding to things, showing up on time, not missing appointments, those basics are huge. And it's amazing how many people are big personalities and don't realize that, it's the blocking and tackling that really gets things done.
Yeah.
And so that's important for me. And then the other thing is, people being able to read a room is really important as well. And so knowing your audience, and in my case, my product I'm going to sell very differently depending on the account I'm walking into, and that's an important thing to be able to do, is to be able to pivot and say, okay, in this situation, I want to do this versus something else.
Yeah, you have to be I think, and this is not just for our brands, but I think you got to be a bit of a chameleon in this industry.
Absolutely.
Multiple brands and even just going from one restaurant to another restaurant to a bar to this retailer versus that retailer. Yeah, you just got to have that empathy to understand like what's going on with the person that you're talking to and what they're trying to do. Particularly if you're looking for cocktail menus. I think we had talked about it a couple of days ago, Elaine. Like we have a Collins program. It's awesome. It's great. It moves cases and it's awesome because I can go into certain type of, mid-level cocktail account and say, here's a Collins glass. This is how you make a Bull Rush Gin Collins. I'll give you coasters. I'll reprint your menus. I'll do table tents, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. And it checks a box and it moves product for us. But 80% of the accounts I go into, it's either don't tell me what kind of cocktails to make, or just give me a list of all the cocktails that I should make with Bull Rush Gin. And it's very, very few in between. And understanding that, the cocktails that you send to one account might be different than the other. And many accounts don't even want to talk about cocktails. They'll figure it out on their own. So that's just the dynamic.
The nature of the beast.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Being able to adjust and realizing that you're present, and it's not personal.
Right.
It's business, as the mobsters. It's not a mobster. Who says that? It's not personal. It's business. I know it's a famous line.
Yeah.
But it is true, because people can get really offended, and they're like, "Oh my god, I got rejected so often," and I'm like,
"You gotta have thick skin." Yeah, you gotta have thick skin,
and you need to know to adjust, and then you need to know to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about you; it's about them. Find out as much information as you can. And then talk about your brand. I think a lot of us get nervous and they start presenting really fast. Like, it is my brand. And you're like,
I think if you're going to be a good entrepreneur, and obviously I think most salespeople are good entrepreneurs, you got to be a better listener than talker. That's just my opinion. Now there are some people that are the salespeople that just come in and light up the room and they're super dynamic and they get everybody fired up and rah, 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 rah. But I think most people have to go in with the attitude that they're going to try and learn and understand what the account wants. And Josh touched on it, like what the account wants, what they need, and react more so than trying to cram your product down their throat in a way that's they'll buy a bottle to get you the hell out, but that's it. So
that is so true. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up with this. Thanks, guys. That was great. If you had any advice, and I usually say for career brand ambassadors, but I guess I'll career to a new person who's about to launch a new brand, that you wish somebody kind of told you, like something you might have learned, and you're like, oh God, I wish I knew that right from the start. What would it be? If you had like one big piece of advice that you wanted to tell somebody getting into this crazy business. Josh, I'll go with you.
I'm gonna give some advice that Julie Renner from Clover Club gave me. Don't be a
Julie
dick.
Renner.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
be a dick. Yeah,
Don't be a dick.
That's my favorite piece of advice.
And it was interesting because I was confused. I didn't understand what she was talking about, because I was like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, look, you're going to go into a place, and in this is a great example. I went into Clover Club and she tasted Barrow's and she's like, I love it. It's great. It's awesome. I'll never use it. And I was like, what? And she's like, oh, I make my own ginger syrup here. I absolutely, think it's the best thing on, since, and so we wouldn't use your brand. But she's like, but don't be a dick, because I'm going to be doing a menu consult for a restaurant out in Westchester, and they'll never be able to make my ginger liqueur, make my ginger syrup. And so I'm going to recommend your ginger liqueur for those recipes if you're not an asshole. And so it was a great sort of eye opener, like that, just because someone's saying no to you in one instance doesn't mean they're always going to say no to you. And it doesn't mean they wouldn't recommend you to a friend who's doing something else. So, the key, I think it's important, don't take things personally. That's huge. But also know that, those relationships matter. And that leads me to the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which was with the distributor, if you can find one or two reps in the distributor to be your champion and establish a relationship, overinvest in them, and get them successful with your brand, then that helps it sort of flow out to the rest of the reps in that distributor. So I would say those two things is,
that's great advice.
And to anyone who I've been a dick to, I apologize. I'm sure it's happened at some point.
And I can't imagine it, Josh. I've known you too long. You're too nice. Tony?
I was, if you're launching a brand, I would say the biggest piece of advice I would give to somebody is, when you're looking at your P&L and you're looking at your business plan, take that line item that you have for sales and marketing and quadruple it because, or maybe even more. I think a lot of people, and this is obviously a generalization, but a lot of people come into the industry from the perspective of, if I make a great product and I get a good distributor, then it'll sell and it'll be great. It'll be awesome. And I'll be the Tito's of gin or whatever. And that's obviously doesn't necessarily happen. So
Tito's
really,
didn't sell a bottle outside of Texas for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
It's overnight success.
Yep.
No,
yep.
It's like Grey Goose. Grey Goose for 10 years before it sold the bottle, and people used to make fun of it. It was called Grey Goose.
My distributor in Georgia was the first distributor of Tito's outside of the state of Texas. And he's got stories of like buying a container and sitting on it for a year and a half. But point being, you have to invest in sales and marketing. Yes, organic things happen. Yes, sometimes brands just freaking take off and you just got to ride the wave and manage it and do those types of things. But the amount of time, energy, effort, cost you have to put into sales and marketing is, I think, something that most people drastically underestimate when they go to launch a brand. I did, and I was in the industry for 15 years when I launched a brand.
On the marketing side.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the biggest key. And then just knowing that your distributor, when I do consulting for small brands, and I don't do it as much as I used to, is that lesson of the distributor is not going to sell it for you. Your distributor is not going to build your brand for you. Yes, you might be able to run an incentive and they'll get 50 pods and they'll get 20 cocktail menus, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe that'll stick, but for the most part, you need to supplement that with a body or somebody that is going to be the sales, marketing, whatever lead in your organization. So, yeah. No,
absolutely. I think that's great because I think a lot of people make that mistake. I hear that. I've heard that 100 times. Like I got in the distributor, I just figured that was it. Like, they would get it on the menus. And I'm
just the start. Yeah.
Yes, it is just the starting place. Well, gentlemen, technical issues aside, this was fantastic.
Sorry about that, guys, by the way.
No, it's okay. It happens. Had it happen to me several times. So it was really great to get to know you guys a little bit better, to hear about your stories, and you guys gave some really great advice. So for those of you who were tuning in, thank you so much for watching. And if you missed any of this, you can find it online. It'll be on Facebook for the next 2 weeks. It'll be on the YouTube channel, Celebrate the Brand Ambassador Forever. Or you can go to my website, Duff on the Rocks. All the videos, you can see all the past ones, interviews as well, since this is episode 44. So there's 43 other ones if you want to tune into. So, but guys, thank you. Thanks again. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thanks, guys.
anyone
Right.
have any questions that we didn't answer? I'm happy to be DM'd about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Look up Josh Morton, Barrow's Intense Ginger Liqueur, and Tony Bagnulo at Broad Creek.
Tony B at broadcreekspirits.com. Yeah.
Thank you. There you go. All right, guys. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.